like to welcome everybody to the National Press Club and this briefing that is hosted by the American Institute for International Steel and the Coalition of American Metal Manufacturers and Users. I'm Paul Nathanson with the Policy Resolution Group at Bracewell and a Communications Advisor to the Coalition. Tariffs are taxes. That's the reason that the Coalition is launching today. The Section 232 tariffs of 25% on imported steel and 10% on imported aluminum are taxes on the U.S. manufacturing sector that, if not terminated quickly, will cost thousands of jobs and in the end do nothing to help the domestic steel industry. The coalition that we are launching today represents a diverse array of steel-using manufacturers, from metal formers to machinists to food equipment manufacturers and more. Our goal is simple and direct: to have the Section 232 tariffs terminated as quickly as possible. Steel manufacturers employ millions of Americans. Steel-using manufacturers employ millions of Americans compared to the domestic steel industry, which employs just 140,000. With the exception of the U.S. steel industry, the entire U.S. manufacturing sector is opposed to the 232 tariffs because, as you will hear today, the tariffs will erode American competitiveness and diminish our industrial sector by making the U.S. an island of high steel and aluminum prices. This administration's stated goal is to create new jobs and help U.S. manufacturers prosper, but these tariffs will bring the opposite result. So you can find more information on the coalition at www.tariffsaretaxes.org. We'll also have a press release and other materials at the table, so please grab it on the way out. So I'm now pleased to introduce Richard Chris, who's the president of the American Institute for International Steel, who will be hosting today's briefing.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for spending part of your day with us. We're very pleased to have you. I just want to say a couple of brief points before we start our panel today. First, just a brief preview of who we are. As Paul mentioned, I have the honor of leading the American Institute for International Steel, which is the leading voice for America's steel supply chain. We have, in our organization, we have over 120 companies who represent hundreds of thousands of working men and women. Our members include major port authorities, railroads, transportation companies, stevedores, longshoremen, service centers, importers, exporters, logistics companies, and others. So we really cover a broad swath of the American economy. Our aim today, we're here to bring to the public discussion about United States trade policy an important new analysis regarding the stated official public policy basis for the Section 232 steel investigation and the steel tariffs imposed by the administration. We believe it is highly important that these vital public policy discussions be informed to the greatest possible extent by thoughtful analysis of facts, history, data, real-world experience, and a broad consideration of the costs and benefits, particularly on the lives of the working men and women, not just in our association, but throughout the economy. So that's why we asked one of this country's most experienced economic analysts, Dr. John Martin, to undertake the work we highlight today. A brief word on that analysis. The new analysis that we're going to be talking about in today's meeting takes a critical look at a central claim by the Department of Commerce underpinning the Section 232 investigation and its subsequent finding that steel tariffs are necessary. Not only that they're necessary, but according to the Commerce Department, they're really the only effective way to deal with this so-called crisis. So rather than tell you what the Department of Commerce report said, I'll just quote directly from it. Quote, "The quotas or tariffs imposed should be sufficient, even after exceptions, if granted, to enable U.S. steel producers to operate at an 80% or better average capacity utilization rate based on available capacity in 2017, unquote. So this central claim that tariffs will enable U.S. steel producers to operate at an 80% or better capacity utilization rate is at the heart of the rationale for these steel tariffs. And this rationale is explicitly stated in official government reports. Yet, despite its critical importance to this debate, this assertion has been little noted in our public policy discussions and has not been thoroughly and critically evaluated until now. Now, you'll probably hear, or I've already heard, that proponents of the steel tariffs no doubt argue that the process of granting exemptions will make the steel tariffs less onerous and therefore somehow acceptable. These arguments are baseless, they're without merit. For example, how will exemptions covering significant steel exporting countries assist the goal of attaining an 80% capacity utilization rate? If the exemptions are meant to be useful, why are the procedures for obtaining them confusing, complex, and full of traps for the unwary? It's simply the case that unless you have a team of really experienced lawyers who know how to decipher this stuff and deal with these types of complexities, you're destined to fail. You're not destined to win an exemption, you're destined to fail. How do the steel tariffs address in a meaningful way China's prolific use of state trading enterprises and their trade distorting practices? The fact is they don't. In fact, on page, I think it's 3 of today's Financial Times, there's a story about this very point, that China's promises to reduce its excess capacity are simply that, words that we've heard before. Finally, let me just conclude with a brief comment about Dr. Martin and his study. The analysis released today was prepared by Dr. Martin and his team at Martin Associates, a leading national economics and transportation consulting firm that has, since 1986, conducted more than 900 economic planning studies for nearly every port in the United States, as well as ports in China, Europe, Ireland, South America, and elsewhere. Dr. Martin prepared the National Economic Impact Study that we released last year, showing that new steel import tariffs will put in jeopardy 84,000 direct, induced, and indirect jobs in the marine transportation system, handling imported iron and steel products, and also put in jeopardy 39,000 jobs in the U.S. agricultural sector. That part of the U.S. ag sector that handles the 47 million tons of grain that's exported through the lower Mississippi River ports. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Martin, who will discuss his report and his analysis that we have for you today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It automatically turned over. That's great. I want to reemphasize what Richard said. When we first looked at the report that was put out by Commerce, which is the effect of imports of steel on the national security, this was released on January 11th, 2018. This is the report that allowed recommended the tariffs that Richard was quoting, the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum to be imposed. And the whole crux of this report is the fact that in order to have enough steel capacity production available to meet national security needs in the predictable future, we must attain an 80% capacity utilization of the U.S. steel industry. So we looked at that and said, let's look at what's going on with steel industry capacity utilization over time. And what I have here, I'm supposed to pull this up here. What I have here is just a chart. We have handouts, by the way, of a fuller presentation. But when you look at the red marks, the red line is the capacity utilization of the U.S. steel industry, percentage-wise. It's around 70% now. Back in 2000, it was up in the high 80s, early 90s. What the blue bars represent are imports, the level of imports. And what's interesting When steel capacity utilization goes up, imports go up. When steel capacity utilization goes down, imports go down, which is completely perverse of what underlying tariffs. In the sense you restrict imports, capacity utilization should go up. That's the underlying premise of commerce. But actually, you see that it has not gone down. You can really see the impact of the recession in 2009, which drew imports down and capacity utilization. I got it. Now, when you look at really what's driving capacity utilization in the U.S. steel industry, it's the demand for the output of durable manufacturing, which are automobiles, heavy equipment industries, and appliance industries, so forth and so on. When durable goods output goes up, capacity goes up. When it drops down. When it goes up, it goes up. And that also drives the import levels. So we kept looking at this thing like, all right, when in history did we have major steel import situations? And we were fortunate enough back in 2001 and 2 to do some of the work on the beginning of Section 201, and then in 2006 we investigated again to see what the impact was on Section 201. So what I did, I looked at steel capacity utilization over time, again, capacity utilization, and looked at when Section 201, which imposed tariffs in March of 2002, and were repealed in December of 2003. And you blow this, you can see how capacity utilization has really never, after the recession, has never come back up. But more importantly is this block here. This is the time period when the Section 201 import quotas were imposed. And what we find when you blow this up, they were imposed March 5th of 2002. So roughly started taking effect the second quarter of 2002. They were removed back in December of 2003. So they're on for about 22 months. What's amazing, you look at when they were imposed, it was about capacity utilization of about 90.7% capacity utilization of the industry. During the time that they were imposed, that 22 months period, capacity utilization of the industry dropped from 90% to 79.2%. They removed them. They were removed. They were supposed to be on through December, through 2005. They were removed prematurely by the Bush administration in December 2003. And when they were removed, it's amazing the capacity utilization in the industry shot back up. So when you start talking about using tariffs to improve the capacity utilization of the U.S. steel industry empirically, and it doesn't take a genius to look at this and just plot it, and you say, well, there's absolutely no relationship except a perverse relationship, an inverse relationship of capacity utilization and the imposition of Section 201 in those cases. So why should we expect anything different except for increasing prices within the U.S. steel industry? So we had a lot more information on this in the handout, but really, moving on to our next panelist, just the conclusions of what we looked at. Number one, most importantly, there does not appear to be any type of relationship between imports and steel capacity utilization. When Section 201 was imposed in March of 2002, removed in 2003, we almost a 10 percentage point drop in capacity utilization. During the imposition of Section 201, we were able to do some analysis of the impact on the marine transportation system. During Section 201, it cost about 22 million person hours during that 22 months of loss of direct induced and indirect jobs in the marine transportation surface industry. And as we're going to hear next, there's been current work being done by Ms. Blockman on the impact of the tariffs, now the 25% increased tariffs. So with that,
I'd like to just real quickly introduce our other two panelists today. Laura Boffman, to my immediate left, is an economist with the Trade Partnership. And next to her is Troy Roberts, who's the CEO of Qualtech Manufacturing from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And we're very honored to have them here today with us, and especially somebody from the manufacturing world who can tell you about the real world effects that we're talking about as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura and for her perspectives.
Thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. When the Steel 232 and the Aluminum 232 reports were made public in February, I, along with just about everybody here, probably we cracked them open and went looking to see what was in them. And as an economist and a number lover, I went straight to Figure 1, which showed data on what the administration estimated, as Dr. Martin said, what level of import cut do we need to get to 80% capacity utilization. And I looked closely and I saw that they had actually done some serious economic modeling, which is not typical of anybody outside the International Trade Commission. I was very impressed and I thought, wow, okay, well, I'm very familiar with the model that they use. We use it ourselves, and I know that this model produces a wealth of information about the impact of the trade policy change on the U.S. economy. And I see here in Figure 1 that they estimate the decline in imports and they estimate the increase in production. Bravo. Where are all the other effects that you're supposed to get out of this modeling? Where's the change in trade? Where's the increase in prices or the effect in prices? Where's the effect on employment? Not in there. So I got a little concerned that the president wasn't getting fully informed by his advisors about the effects of the proposed tariffs and quotas and other things that the reports were recommending. And so I got in touch with my partner, who's the modeling expert, and said, hey, let's finish the story, because the full story isn't out there. So he cranked up exactly the same model, and we put out a report a couple days later that estimated the effect. We concentrated on U.S. jobs, estimated the effect on U.S. jobs of the proposed tariffs. And then within a few days, actually a week, the president announced that he was going to do 25% tariffs instead of 24% tariffs, and he was going to exempt Canada and Mexico for the time being. So I called Joe back up and I said, can you rerun it and give me, and also the Europeans and other trading partners were threatening to retaliate. So can you rerun it and let's exempt Canada and Mexico and let's throw in retaliation and let's see what the effect is on jobs. And that's the study you have in your packet, which I'm going to summarize very quickly for you here today. What we found was that 25% tariffs on aluminum and 10% tariffs on aluminum and 25% on steel would indeed increase employment in the steel and aluminum industries by just over 26,000 jobs. But there would be net losses to manufacturing as a whole, because not every manufacturing sector would win. Net losses of just short of 4,000 jobs. Steel-consuming sectors, many of them are in manufacturing, some of them are in services like construction, they would experience net losses of 90,000 jobs, and the agriculture industry, thanks to retaliation, would lose 24,000 jobs. Overall, we were looking at 470,000 potential job losses as a result of the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, or 18 jobs for every 18 jobs lost for every one gained. Now, I would just note very briefly that even studies that were issued thereafter from steel supporters came to essentially the same conclusions. Now, since then, there's been a lot of talk about exemptions from the tariffs, and country exemptions as well as product exemptions, and the legitimate question arises, well, what's this going to do to your job estimates? To which I say, probably nothing. Because if you look at the example of Korea, all they did was swap a tariff for a quota. The whole point behind a quota is to reduce imports, and so, as a result, import prices will go up. Same thing as with a tariff. You're just swapping one form of import protection for another. The net effect on the U.S. economy is higher prices, and that's what drives the job losses. We don't know what kinds of deals they're going to cook up, if any, with any of the other countries. If they swap tariffs for quotas, same thing. There's still a restrictive impact of imports on the U.S. economy, which is going to cause the job losses. I note as well, I think you mentioned it too, no you didn't, in the 232 reports, the administration says, the president says that he may increase tariffs on countries that don't get deals in order to compensate for the reduced import coverage from many countries that do get deals. So the bottom line is, the aim of this thing is, as Dr. Martin said, to drive up capacity utilization to 80% by cutting imports and increasing production. And so the way they're going to do that is, if they take anybody out, they'll compensate by driving up tariffs on whoever's left in, because the game is to keep imports restricted, and that's what causes the job losses.
Thanks, Laura. Now we'll hear from our last panelist this afternoon, Troy Roberts, CEO of Qualtech Manufacturing. Troy?
And I'm not an economist.
Probably happier for it.
As Richard said, my name is Troy Roberts. I'm the CEO of Qualtech Manufacturing in Colorado Springs, but I'm also the first chair of the Precision Metal Forming Association. It's a trade association representing $137 billion metal forming industry in North America. We have 800 member companies, which also include suppliers of equipment, materials, and services to the metal forming industry. Qualtech specifically, we have 74 employees, and we specialize in providing stamped parts to primarily the medical device and aerospace industries, using our intellectual know-how to make really highly complicated products to very precise dimensions. To meet the demand, we have plans to increase our workforce by 17%, including hiring more tool and die makers and stamping press operators. And we're also planning to invest $1 million in new capital equipment this year. And frankly, our biggest constraint to growth up to this point has been workforce and workforce issues and finding people to run the equipment that we have. And there was a lot of positive headwinds from the passage of the tax cuts to focus on workforce development. The Trump administration has been very supportive of that effort, and we applaud them for that. But now with the announcement of the tariffs on steel and aluminum, because we process a lot of both, we're taking a significant step back. Our investment in workforce and new equipment is now in doubt, because it hinges on the price and availability of our most important inputs, namely steel and aluminum. Steel accounts for 50% of the costs for the typical parts we stamp and 15% of the dies we make. As a result of the Section 232 tariffs on steel, our numbers now show an additional expense of $182,000 for steel based on what we have on our books of orders now. But it doesn't stop there. Aluminum is 65% of the average part cost that we manufacture. As a result of the tariff on aluminum, we now expect $121,000 in aluminum price increases. So we're a small company, and with these tariffs, our business will face a combined $300,000 cost increase on our steel and aluminum raw material purchases. This is a huge blow to a company and to our 74 employees trying to grow our business. That $300,000 provides the funds to hire the 14 people that we plan on hiring in 2018. That $300,000 provides the results to support investing an additional $1 million in new equipment that then requires us to hire those 14 additional workers. Qualtech strives to lead the industry in green initiatives, not just working to reduce emissions and increasing recycling, but make certain we use the latest cutting-edge technology to keep us globally competitive. That's how we've been able to compete, because we compete globally. Needless to say, competitively priced steel and aluminum underpinned by a stable supply is critical for our company to have a fair chance to compete in the global marketplace. In this global economy, we operate on very slim margins. Even the slightest increase in our prices can eliminate our quote from consideration by our customers. And let me give you a few real timely examples of the impact these tariffs are having on our company. One of our customers we produce 8.4 million parts for annually. Since the tariffs took effect, the quoted price for material has increased 32%, and the lead time for delivery of the raw material has doubled to 14 weeks. When price and delivery times significantly increase, customers will start looking at other foreign suppliers who can deliver more timely and at a better price. We have another customer that represents $2 million of our business, and we use stainless steel for them. That price has increased 35% per pound, and 35% per pound, and the lead time has increased from 7 to 13 weeks. These examples are the new norm. Our Qualtech situation is not uncommon. As I've mentioned, I'm very active in the Precision Metal Forming Association, and I'm hearing countless similar stories repeated from other manufacturers across the country, and we are all extremely concerned. In Qualtech's case, please note the examples I provided are from U.S. steel and aluminum companies and not foreign producers. So all of our product uses U.S. steel, and U.S. manufactured steel and aluminum. As we all know, history has a way of repeating itself. As the previous speakers pointed out, the Section 201 tariffs levied in the early 2000s delivered the exact opposite result of what was intended. A decrease in U.S. steel capacity utilization occurred instead of an increase, and 200,000 U.S. workers lost their jobs. As Ms. Bachman noted, over 400,000 U.S. jobs are projected to be lost as a result of the Section 232 tariff. Now, history does indeed repeat itself. Qualtech purchases steel and aluminum produced in the U.S. I suggest everyone in Washington take a closer look at the actions taken by the Aluminum Association that represents the domestic aluminum producers. They are calling for a global forum to address global overcapacity and to work with our trading partners to balance global capacity with current future demand. This is a much more reasonable approach to address the root cause problem of too much production capacity in the global system. A tariff or an effective tax on U.S. manufacturers, which employ over 6.5 million American workers, and makes U.S. manufactured products non-competitive in the global marketplace, is not going to solve this global overcapacity problem. We need to apply the same logic for addressing global steel overcapacity. Steel producers are not in this alone. We need to all work together globally to effectively address our mutual concerns. Tariffs do not just hit competing steel producers overseas, they hit domestic steel industry's own customer base right here at home, customers like us. And this is precisely why the Aluminum Association is not supportive of this tariff. They know that it's bad for their customers. Finally, these tariffs are extremely counterproductive with respect to progress made these past few years. The administration has done some great things for us. The tax cuts were a welcome development that were required to make the U.S. corporate tax rate structure globally competitive. Business conditions in the United States have improved. We're seeing overdue regulatory reform and a focus on apprenticeships and workforce development. But now the Section 232 tariffs impact on the cost and delivery of our most basic inputs are making us non-competitive. That is, there's just no way to sustain expansion, develop new products, bring on new employees, as we thought we were going to do this year in the face of what amounts to a huge tax being imposed on our inputs. My hope is somebody in the administration figures this out soon before the consequences to our company and to our whole industry cannot be undone. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. With that, we'd like to open it up for questions, ladies and gentlemen, and you just raise your hands or indicate you'd like to ask a question. We'll be happy to spend time with you. Yes? No.
Well, I just had a question. I was a little bit confused by something Laura was saying. I mean, you said the Commerce Department used this model that you're very familiar with, but they only published part of the results. So did their model show that restricting imports would get capacity utilization up above 80%? And do you have any quarrel with that projection? Because Mr. Martin seems to think that it won't get above 80%.
Yeah, the question was, does the Department of Commerce's economic model, indicate that the capacity utilization rate would rise up to 80% or above using the methods. Is that fair?
We can't really see behind the curtain about what assumptions they put into their version of the model, but all we have is what's in figure 1, which says cut imports by this, production goes up to this, capacity utilization goes up to this. They assert it. The capacity and the production, they just assert that.
Okay. So there's nothing in the report that explains how we got to that?
No.
If I could just add, the lack of transparency here is one of the real issues. I think it was John mentioned, Dr. Martin mentioned earlier, that instead of in addition to tariffs, we're seeing some of these managed negotiations with steel exporting countries result in quotas, essentially managed trade. And in addition to being a cost on our economy that's at least equal to the cost of tariffs, quotas have the additional problem of not being transparent. You don't really get to see the cost in exactly the same way that you see or can appreciate how a cost is imposed by a direct tax like a tariff. So utilizing quotas as a substitute for tariffs gets you exactly nowhere in terms of transparency. And the problem of transparency is something that we're also extremely concerned about. Yes, ma'am.
So it's kind of two-pronged. First of all, you're having the press conference, but are you in touch with the administration as a coalition about this? And is it a matter of him surrounding himself with poor advisors, or is there some other agenda if there's a lack of transparency in these outcomes?
Well, take the last part of your question first. Is this the result of poor advice? I wouldn't say it's poor advice, but I think the going to tariffs and quotas is sort of the first option here. Is really a failure of imagination. You heard the fact mentioned a few minutes ago that the aluminum industry in the United States is calling for a global forum for aluminum. Well, we have that for steel. That exists, and it was created in the last year, announced in the last year of the Obama administration at a G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. And the United States helped create the Global Forum on Steel Overcapacity, which is being overseen by and assisted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a treaty organization to which the United States is a member and a party. As far as we can tell, as far as I can tell, the United States has done very little with the Global Forum and has certainly not taken what a fair observer could call a leadership role in this group and helping to develop the agenda for the group and lead the group. And which really goes to the question about how do you see the United States as a leader, as a force in the development of ideas and action and principles to deal with the steel overcapacity issue. If the United States is not actively engaged in a robust, sustained period of diplomatic leadership with respect to the Global Forum on Steel Overcapacity. The other part of your question, are we engaged with the administration?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. The coalition that's been announced today is a new entity, a new creation, so it hasn't, bulk of its work is ahead of it. My organization, the American Institute for International Steel, has been extremely engaged in presenting ideas and comments, feedback, reaction to the administration at all levels, including to the President and to the Secretary of Commerce. Yes, sir.
As far as the coalition, any details on how many members? Are the companies similarly sized as Mr. Roberts? I think he said 74 employees. Or...
Yeah, I'll ask Paul Nathanson to address that, if he would.
So the coalition, they're mostly made up of small and medium-sized manufacturers, and our associations represent, it's in the thousands of manufacturers across the country.
Yes, ma'am.
Jenny Mandel, E&E News. When the coalition website launched a couple days ago, that member list wasn't up. Is that being kept private, or?
No, it's public, and there's a press release out now on the table that shows we have 5 or 6 associations. We've only been in existence for a week. We expect that to grow, but it's all public. It's on the table outside.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Richard, you mentioned that you're talking about the exemption process, and you said it had traps for the unwary, in addition to confounding. Can you elaborate on that? I realize this could get into the weeds a little bit, but what's wrong with the exemption?
Yeah, we held a webinar for folks from around the country about 2 weeks ago on this, and we had 2 very accomplished attorneys guiding about 140 people on this call through over an hour and 10, 20-minute period of time about what these traps consist of. And rather than risk boring everybody to tears about what those complexities are and how they ought to be navigated or could be navigated, that's something that I think we could talk about probably offline. But suffice it to say, we had 2 highly skilled attorneys explain this, and some of that they were concerned about how the non-lawyer person would be able, by him or herself, to navigate these complexities.
And I can just add, several of our coalition members, we've had discussions about this. There's a question about confidentiality, business confidential information. You know, everything's going to go on the internet, and your competitors are going to see. So there's a hesitancy on that. A lot of these companies have experience with the 201, where very few of these exemptions were granted. So there is, I think there's a bit of a hesitancy to go through the exclusion process at this time. Although there are 1,200, I think, exclusions. By the way, the Commerce Department has exclusion requests. By the way, the Commerce Department has put on Indeed.com job openings to review these. So that's not a good sign that they're going to get these done within 90 days as they promised. So.
My understanding is there's something like 4,000 applications for exemptions. That number is about a week old, so we could be well above that number by now. But having worked at the Commerce Department at one point in the Bush administration, I can tell you that as large as the Commerce Department is, the unit that handles this type of issue is not prepared to handle 4,000 plus requests for review of paperwork describing issues related to highly complex regulations. So it's hard to understand how they accomplish all of this and give each applicant a reasonable and fair hearing within a shorter period of time.
One thing with respect to exemptions, when the Section 232 was first brought out, immediately Canada and Mexico Mexico were exempted from this. And when you look at the other countries that had their exemptions, we had Argentina, Brazil, et cetera, all major suppliers. When you look at China, who seem to be now the target of all this, China is the 11th largest exporter of steel in general, including steel mill products to the United States. So it's kind of interesting to see how immediately certain countries were exempted quickly, which is against the whole principle of raising the capacity utilization to 80% to allow for future defense capacity. So there's inconsistencies in this.
Well, you said this figure of 4,000 applications for exemptions. Do you know, I mean, are countries just requesting exemptions for the countries that are currently hit by the tariffs? Or are they sort of preemptively requesting exemptions for products from the European Union, Argentina, Australia, et cetera, that got these temporary tariff delays? I mean, you may not have that level of knowledge. I just wondered if you knew and whether you would expect a spike in requests for exemptions if those countries aren't able to strike some sort of deal with the administration.
Yeah, I don't know the rationale that particular countries have for requesting exemptions for certain products, whether they're preemptive or something else. I do know that there's a very extensive behind the scenes discussions taking place with respect to qualifying for exemptions, getting a permanent full exemption.
Yeah.
Every country is seeking a permanent full exemption, not the temporary ones that we're familiar with. But again, that's a whole area of uncertainty that these applicant countries are trying to resolve, and the administration has not given us a full description of what those negotiations consist of.
Yeah, and I would add, Richard said there's 4,000 exclusion requests, and I haven't checked in the last couple of days, but last time I checked online, if you go to the portal, they've only posted a few dozen of them. They're still processing them, so it's not a good sign either.
I mean, they hope to have like a decision on the exclusions within 90 days.
Right.
Are you guys optimistic that they'll be able to do that within 90 days?
No. Not at all.
Just also to add, the whole level of uncertainty that's part of this process is in itself a business deterrent, and by itself is a daily complication for the normal business practices that you would expect to see in the steel supply chain. So if you're a purchasing manager, or you're a CEO or a CFO of a steel using company, or of a service center, or some other part of the steel supply chain, you wake up every day and wonder whether or not tariffs or quotas are going to be announced that day that are going to seriously disrupt or disturb your business. You wonder if you work on the docks in some of our major ports, and you're in charge of assigning workers on the docks to handle incoming ships. You have to wonder whether or not ships that are already on the water are going to be able to discharge their cargo that day, and whether or not orders that you've made in the past are going to be able to be fulfilled. So there's a tremendous amount of worry and concern that results in disruption of normal business that we're seeing.
Question for Laura. You mentioned briefly other studies that had come out from some of the groups on the supporting the tariffs. How do you contrast the or you said they supported you. How do you, what in those studies is flawed, or what findings do they have that that you said that actually are consistent with the findings in your studies?
It was really interesting when I went back in and looked at some of them. It seemed like their intent was to trash our study, and they go at it by nitpicking at little assumptions here and there. But what struck me as kind of cool was that we come to exactly the same conclusion, which is that, yeah, steel workers get jobs, steel consuming workers lose jobs, they lose more jobs than the steel workers win, and overall, there's a net loss to U.S. jobs. Now this is, a study that was put out by Dan D'Amico's group, a study that came out from the Economic Policy Institute. See, these are folks that regularly trash pro-trade findings of things, and they came to the same conclusion that we came to. This is a bad thing for U.S. jobs. So I thought that was kind of interesting. First time that's ever happened.
If you assume for a moment that there's a political agenda behind setting the tariffs in the first place, how do you see this analysis as affecting that political agenda?
Well, we're not here to try to decipher political motives or to assign political motives. We'll leave that for I guess for the political analysts and reporters. Our concern is really about the economics of these decisions, the real world effects that we're seeing and we'll see more of as long as these trade measures remain in place. So, the political motivations are something that we'll, I guess, discuss outside in a different capacity, but we're really concerned about what effects these trade measures are having on working men and women and their ability to keep their employment.
And I would only add on the politics is, look, the administration said they want to grow the U.S. manufacturing sector and they want to protect the U.S. manufacturing sector. We have the data that shows that this is not the way to do it, that this will have the opposite effect. We think that if we can rise above the din of noise in Washington, that these tariffs will be lifted. I really encourage you to speak to Troy, who talked about the impact already on his company. We're lucky that this week we have the Precision Metal Forming Association and the National Tooling and Machining Association. They have a fly-in, so several company CEOs are with us today, and I'm happy to introduce them to you. And they all have similar stories to Troy. Spikes in steel prices, delays in delivery. It's already, and we're less than a month into this. So I think that when the administration hears what the impact is, we're hopeful that they will lift the tariffs.
So just, Isabel, going over inside U.S. trade, just based off of what you just said, you mentioned there's a fly-in going on this week. Any meeting with lawmakers at all? Or?
Yeah, they've had over 90 meetings with lawmakers.
Okay.
And Troy was met with the lawmakers. And what are you hearing when you meet with the members of Congress? Can you put the mic close to you?
Sure. I think there's a general unawareness. On a simplistic level, you say, well, if you buy U.S. Produced product, it doesn't affect you. And that's what I think the general perception is. But the reality is, you've had the whole pricing levels lifted. This is why I'm not, and we've explained why I really don't care about which countries are excluded. Any excluded country just gets put in the same position as a U.S. producer, which allows them to lift up their pricing. So as we saw in the 201 tariff, what happens, it's very easy to pick up a tool and shift it from, say, our plant to somewhere in Mexico and run that part there. A lot of stuff what we produce goes into Mexico and is incorporated into another assembly. So this is not a difficult thing for customers to do. They'll do that. They will definitely do that. and because it's easy to do and it's the most cost-effective thing for them to do. So we're explaining this to the lawmakers, which I think they're surprised. They did not understand that it would have this effect. So I think it's a lot of just simplification, misunderstanding, and what we're trying to do is get the message out to say this has happened before. Let's not do it again, please.
I mean, obviously you weren't successful in preventing the tariffs from going into effect, although some have been temporarily delayed. Is it easier to get them removed, you think, because you can point to examples like Mr. Roberts' company? I mean, does that help? And I don't know, what do you think how do you gauge your chances of getting them removed?
Well, unlike the 201 back in 2002, which had a defined process where at the midpoint of the 3-year tariffs, there were 3-year tariffs. At the midpoint, the ITC had to do a report.
Right.
There is no timeline for the 232, which is not good for our members. On the other hand, I think the president tomorrow can watch the live stream of this press conference and say this is a terrible idea, and it's not having the impact that I intended, and he could lift the tariffs tomorrow. So that's what we're hopeful for, because if you look at the data, I mean it's pretty clear. And I want to emphasize again, the entire U.S. manufacturing sector, besides the steel producers, and that includes the domestic aluminum producers, are against these tariffs.
John Maynard Keynes, probably one of the most famous economists who ever lived, was criticized once for changing his mind about something that he had once professed, and he responded to his critic by saying, "Well, sir, when I see new facts, I change my mind. What do you do?" So that's what we would ask of the administration. Here are facts on the ground that call for a re-evaluation of the original premise under which these actions were created in the first place. And a reasonable person looking at those facts would change their mind.
But how do you plan to keep making that point?
I don't think there's a magic wand. I mean, you've been in this town
right.
I think longer than I have. And, look, we're launching this campaign today. It's going to take advocacy, grassroots, and communications. It's going to be talking to the White House needs to hear from our members. They need to hear from members of Congress, and they need to look at the studies that Dr. Martin and Ms. Boffman have produced. And I think we can do this. We lifted. Look, the people in this room. Some of the people in this room were involved in the 201, and they were responsible, along with the threat of retaliation from our trading partners, for ending the 201 tariffs 18 months early. So there is precedent for us to be successful and for us to succeed in getting these tariffs lifted. It happened the last time. We're hoping it's not going to take 18 months. So we're confident that when the facts are out there that we can get these lifted.
If the president or the administration is watching the live stream, one response could be that the three-pronged approach: trade reform, tax reform, regulatory reform. So could the answer be to Troy and others? Well, you got 2 out of 3. You did say the tax reform benefit. You laid out $300,000 in cost of higher steel, aluminum prices. But what's been the cost benefit from the other measures?
Well, let me, I'll explain it to you as I explained it to the people on the Hill that we talked to. It's like we got these very positive results from what you just described, but this action really cuts us off at the knees. So it goes, in our case, and I think in our membership's case, it goes way beyond the benefits that we got from the tax reform or regulatory reform, because when you're competing for business every day and your prices, in our case, our 2 biggest product lines increase 35%, and and you have a customer that can go somewhere else and get that, we did not have the kind of margins to absorb that difference. So it doesn't matter about those other things. Doesn't matter we need workers. Doesn't matter because we don't have the business to support that. And that's the danger of this tax.
Just a couple of quick points. I want to make clear that we're not just talking about the effects just on steel. Dr. Martin's previous analysis from last year talked about the significant job loss that would occur in parts of the agriculture industry because ships that carry steel coming into the United States with exports from other countries want to go back, want to send those ships back carrying other products, and they typically carry American grain that's shipped down the Mississippi River out of the port of New Orleans and other Gulf water ports. And with the imposition of these trade measures, you'll see fewer steel-carrying ships coming into the United States, and therefore fewer of them going out carrying grain, which causes all kinds of complications, including the inability of American farmers to get their soybeans and other grain exports to market, higher prices for contracting with ship carriers, etc. And now we recently hear about retaliation against increasingly significant agricultural segments of the American economy, particularly with soybeans. China accounts for something like 55% of the $20+ billion of annual soybean sales that the United States makes every year. And now the administration, recognizing finally that there could be negative effects from Chinese retaliation against our soybean exports, the administration is proposing subsidies to American farmers to try to mitigate those effects. Well, if you ask a soybean grower, a soybean farmer in a producer in Iowa or Illinois or Minnesota or any of the other American states where this activity, growing soybeans and putting them into international commerce, well, that's a significant part of the economy. Whether they want subsidies or markets, they will tell you, we want markets. Because the fact is that once you lose an export market, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get it back. That almost never happens. Once retaliation occurs and you see the negative effects and our farmers, our exporters lose markets, we never get them back. And there are particular points in our recent history where we can show how that happened. The most recent being when the United States imposed trade restrictions on Chinese tires. The Chinese turned around, this is a few years ago, in 2011, the Chinese turned around the next day, within 24 hours, and imposed trade restrictions on U.S. exports of chicken parts. It was a $750 million market on something as insignificant as chicken parts that would sell for pennies in the United States, sold at a nice premium in China. That market never returned. We ultimately won a case in the WTO that we brought, but we won that case years later. But the result was we never got that market back. That's gone elsewhere. Well, those markets can go elsewhere now, and the likelihood is that they would.
I was going to say the exact, that was exactly what I was going to say about the consequential impacts of agriculture.
I think we got time for just a couple more. Go ahead, Richard. Rich, say.
For say from PMA. Moving forward, are you guys going to look at putting a scenario together how this will affect NAFTA? Will that be looked at all?
Well, we're very concerned about NAFTA for a number of reasons. I don't want to comment too much about NAFTA because that's a whole
It's the other
separate
side of the coin.
It's a separate side, but we're very concerned about NAFTA for a number of reasons. If for nothing else, Mexico and Canada are our two most important steel trading partners. But the second obvious point is that rather than spending time doing a ground-up rebuilding of NAFTA, it's kind of disappointing that the United States is not spending more time in our trade negotiations, our trade diplomacy, seeking new markets and trying to break new ground, new places that competitive American farmers, manufacturers, ranchers can send their exports. So that's part of the problem.
I promise Troy he's not going to miss this flight. So we got time for one more question, and then I encourage you to ask some folks who are here, or Troy can stick around for a few minutes, but go ahead, please.
Yes, I wanted to know how the coalition's going to work with other trade associations in town in tandem to, I guess, maybe bring congressional members together with the administration in the same room, because it seems like things are happening where there's like ships passing in the night. Like, for example, what you were saying, Laura, USITC typically would have received a request from Senate Finance or House Ways and Means to conduct an economic impact study before this even started, and that didn't happen at all. So then you get the situation where you two came together and came to the conclusion that you would have had the same result in your study. And then on top of that, last week, House Ways and Means had a committee, a hearing on the effects, the economic effects of on jobs and the economy of Section 232 and 301 investigations. And I got there early because I'm like, oh, this is going to be a full house, and really there was no one there. They didn't even have an economist on the panel to testify, and so those were troubling things to me. And sorry to be long-winded, but with that said, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll start in this. So I think there's a lot of activity by various trade associations and company representatives in this town to oppose the tariffs, and I think there was a lot of focus on the trade association part and those opposing the tariffs on that hearing. You might not see a lot of people there because they stream it now, and I know there are, I think MEMA's in the room, and they had right behind you, they had their representative testify very effectively. So, and there are various other coalitions. I know that the National Foreign Trade Council has a large coalition that is working on not only the 232 but the 301. I can tell you that our coalition coordinates and communicates with them closely. So, and there will be, I think, there will be close coordination, communication among all these groups. But you're right. This is fast moving. There's a lot of things happening in Washington, as you guys noticed. So that's why we are going to keep a focus on this. But I'm very confident that, as we saw during the 201, various groups, from agricultural groups to steel users to aluminum users, got together and fought these tariffs.
Just to the other part of your question, we hope that our two studies by Dr. Martin, the one we released last year and the analysis we're describing today, we hope these two studies serve as a catalyst for other efforts to look at these effects of these steel tariffs, and within the context of our broader trade policy, and certainly within the context of their effect on the broader American economy. Certainly the General Accountability Office has the ability to do that. Members of the Finance Committee in the Senate, the Ways and Means Committee in the House are able to call for and have studies on the effects of various aspects of U.S. trade policy. So we know that there are members of both bodies that are very concerned about this. Senator Sass speaks about it all the time. He's really taken a leadership role. Certainly Chairman Brady in the House as well. So we hope and expect there will be more of this type of critical analysis in the future.
Yeah, and just final word, Laura's study in 2002 on 200,000 job losses is still quoted today, so I expect in 2033 we'll be talking about 236 studies, and we'll probably be back here for another press briefing. Thank you all for coming, and as I said, we have, you can come up and ask questions, but we also have several CEOs in the crowd that if you want to talk to them, you're more than welcome. So thank you.